Hey, it's Chris from the Reunion Church podcast. This is episode 7 of Sunday Recaps. This is a recurring series we do weekly where we just kind of discuss some key points from the previous service and see how we can apply it to our faith and help us live out each and every day more like Jesus. And today we're going to be doing something different. We're, as you can tell, in a new spot, in a new place. We're in the same room. Because a lot's been going on. We've been slammed with stuff to do, and it's been crazy. It's been nuts.
Probably why our intro probably didn't sound the same either.
Yes.
That took us many takes to get done.
It took many takes, but it's gonna be a little more casual. We're gonna be covering a lot. We're gonna be covering our previous service, the process of moving and what that does to you spiritually, and just what that means, finally being in the community. And other stuff as well. So I guess just to get started, this last service, it was 2 weeks ago?
Yeah,
it's been a minute.
Yeah.
Okay. And for those that kind of missed it, like what was kind of the general vibe? I mean, not the general vibe, the general idea that we were discussing. Like what was the main...
It was good vibes, if anyone's got any.
Yes,
good vibes.
There's always a good vibe.
Positive vibes.
Yeah.
So we've been going through this series of sensing Jesus in ordinary life. Like, how do we find Jesus in ordinary life, and not trying to basically kind of over spiritualize everything and how God works in just ordinary ways.
Right.
And so there's a temptation that each one of us feels to kind of take over the omnis of God. And that's what the temptation of the Garden of Eden was, right? Where in the Garden of Eden, there's a temptation that, to be like God, what does that mean? You try to take down the omnis, right? Where you try to be everywhere all the time, where you try to be all powerful all the time as well.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we covered 2 weeks ago. This last week, we didn't cover that. We were doing something else. We were putting together some projects for this Friday, where we are going to be doing a service at the Reunion Coffee House to actually help expecting and pregnant moms, and moms who maybe moms who are struggling to financially to have their own baby showers and stuff. And so we put together some gifts and stuff like that. So that's what we did last week. But the week before that, we covered through this series and talking about the temptation to be all powerful, or ideally, when you're all powerful, you can fix any situation that you're in.
Right.
So
you're a superhero. You can do everything.
Yeah. So you can do whatever you want. You can fix any problem, any situation that comes before you. So, and anyone that's had situations like that, if you've got kids, if you've had teenagers, if you've been in ministry, there's a situation that comes before you and you just want to fix that problem immediately. You just want to fix it. You want to fix the situation. You're thinking it should be easy. Just follow what I said. And it's done. But
do what I say and you'll be all right. Just shut up and do it.
just do it.
Yeah.
And we get frustrated because people won't just go and do that.
Yeah.
And so we kind of talk through that temptation, why that's such a struggle for us. Because for some people, it's a real power struggle, because we want to feel powerful over people, whether that's the actual problem of abuse and manipulation in relationships, where people will use that because it's a power play. That's the reality of a lot of people when they are for people who abuse their children and stuff. That's one of those situations where they feel like their life is out of control, and they feel like by physically controlling someone, they have control of that situation.
Right.
We've been, maybe we've worked under bosses same way, where their boss above them is enforcing something, and so they micromanage you like crazy. And it's incredibly frustrating to see that, because they want to fix and be in control of the whole situation.
Well, and what's crazy is nothing actually gets done. When you have this situation that's out of control and out of your hands, you go to this smaller situation and hyper control it, but the whole thing just gets screwed up, whether it's a family dynamic or whether it's that working relationship. Like I remember, there are certain jobs where it's like, why are you micromanaging me? And then you find out what's going on, and it's like the parable of the debtors in the Gospels, where there's the one debtor who was forgiven, and it was for something much small, for something that was a huge sum of money, is a huge debt, and then that person had someone else that owed the money, and it was just just a couple dollars essentially. And they were super strict and super hard on them.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we see with these fix-it-alls, is that they just go to these extremes that you could never see yourself going unless you put yourself in that corner essentially, right?
Yeah. Well, and you want to be in control of everything. You want to be in control of the situation.
Yeah.
Because that's what feels good. And when we think about the hero's journey or some of those things too, right, that we see in the media, or we see stories that are portrayed where the underdog always gets the champion and always gets the win.
Yeah.
But in life, there's a lot of situations where you don't get that, where honestly, we are just told to go in and get beat over and over again. And we're just told to fight, to persevere, even though you may not get the victory. And we don't, as Americans, we really don't like that. We want to say, hey, I'll go in, I'll work hard, I'll sweat, I'll persevere no matter how long it takes, but in the end, I'll win. But the reality is, that's not our story. For a lot of us, that's not our story. We'll go in, we'll work hard, but we'll never get to the spot that we want to be in, because that's not the task that's kind of been given to us.
Yeah. Well, and it's so weird too, because like it goes against everything that we think, but there's so many verses in scripture. Like the first one off the top of my head is, I believe it's in First Peter, resist the devil and he will flee from you. Like every single time there's a mention in scripture of us doing anything active in our faith. It's either resist, it's run away, it's avoid, it's why were you in the courtyard in Proverbs when you were tempted, with lust or whatever, like, or if you're struggling with this addiction, run from it, run from the source, run from the temptation, resist the devil. It's never go for it, go get it, you're the hero, you can do it.
Yeah.
It's always no, get out of there. God's got it. Like you're not the hero of your story, and I think with the fix-it-alls too, there's kind of an interesting idea of empathy versus sympathy, where as a fix-it-all, we kind of struggle with those two categories. Can you kind of touch on, the difference between the two and why it's so important so that we avoid the fix-it-all mentality?
Yeah, well, and I think what you were kind of hitting on, the problem with the fix-it-all mentality, and this kind of hits on the problem with like the name it and claim it, or like Creflo Dollar or Todd White and a lot of those guys who are like, well, you're only sick because you don't have enough faith, or those things. Well, the reality is, like, no, God wants you to kind of go through some of these trials and hardships because you need to be able to build up a heart of empathy, a heart of not of sympathy. And I think we had talked a lot about this because I think Christians in general have built up this mentality that, hey, when you're ministering to someone, you show a lot of sympathy for someone, of like, man, I feel sorry for you, right? I feel sorry that you're going through this. Like, that sucks you're going through this. Empathy is, man, let's go through this. Let me go through this with you in this, right?
Right.
Sympathy is, you see someone in a hole, you're like, man, that sucks.
Right.
That really sucks.
Bummer.
I can't imagine what it's like to be in that. And then you keep going, right?
Yeah.
That's the parable of the Good Samaritan, right? You had the two guys and they probably walk by like, oh man, that's such a bummer. And I feel so bad for him.
Yeah.
Oh, it sucks. I got to get going. Like, I got my other important duties that I got to do, right?
Got to go to the store.
They showed sympathy. They showed, in the church, we have a lot of people who are really good at showing sympathy. Like, man, I can't imagine what it's like. Oh, my heart just breaks. Oh, God bless them, Yeah. And there's sympathy, but rarely are we good at actually showing empathy, where we actually come alongside with them. We actually go into that place with them, because it's dirty, it's hard, it's messy, it's it's ugly. And you have to allow yourself to go through some of those experiences, and just to sit there as well, because you have a certain amount of skill sets, life experiences, things you've been through, where you can sit in that muck with them and help them get out of it. You may not be in the same situation, but at least to a point where you can kind of come alongside with them and help them along that way, for them to kind of realize what they're in and help them get out of it. You can't just come in there and sit there and be like, oh, like, and then just, you're stuck too. That's another issue, right? Like, but you have to be able to come alongside and support them and bring them up out of it, where too often people don't do that. And one of the things that I had personally kind of experienced when I had my heart attack was a lot of people showing sympathy. A lot of people being like, oh man, I can't imagine.
They were liking your posts, they were commenting.
Maybe like, or like there was things like that, and like they'd hear about it, but that was it. They didn't want to actually hear the details. They didn't actually really want to see how I was doing. But then there were a few people, and a good portion of them weren't actually Christians, which was actually kind of shocking.
Yeah.
Like the strongman community group, like all my guys.
Shout out to them. They were awesome.
Yeah. They were a great group of guys that like were reaching out. How are you doing, man? Like, I know so-and-so who has gone through this, and like encourage me in my mindset and stuff. I had, you guys and a few others, but more importantly, one of the best people that I had, Jim and Alicia Barnhart, who they lead this amazing ministry. And Jim just released this book about his life and what they have kind of been going through. I'm totally blanking on his ministry right now. It's Orange.
Suffering Guy.
Well, that's the book.
Oh shoot.
Yeah, that's the book.
It is a ministry you should check out. We'll put it in the show notes.
Put it in the show notes like everyone else does.
Man, I feel bad now.
I know. It's Orange.
It's Orange. It's cool.
It's cool. It's really good. You should check it out.
Jim's a part of it.
Support him. Yeah. Dang it, Jim. Sorry. But Jim and Alicia came over.
Yeah.
And because of their life, like they asked really, and you were there.
Tiller.
Yes,
Tiller.
Tiller Group.
It's Tiller. Sorry.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Thank goodness. Now we're not as bad.
I remembered. I bought the book. It's fine. He has my money.
So they, because of what they've gone through, they were actually able to have empathy with me in those moments where they sat and like, hey, what was it like when you had this? How are you coping with this? What do you, and they for a couple hours just asked and walked through and like, man, I know it's tough. We can get through this together. We can go through this together. And like, that was like some of the most powerful moments that helped me a ton, was having actual empathy. And I think a lot of times, like we don't feel the need to actually have empathy with someone. Yeah. And it's a really strange thing, but that's really, if you're going to disciple someone, if you're going to lead someone to Christ, if you're going to do any of that, like you have to have empathy. You have to get in that spot with them.
Yeah. And what was so interesting about that night too, just being there watching, was like, it felt like such a turning point, both for you and your family, and just in my understanding of what true empathy looks like, because the sorts of questions that were asked were both incredibly, what could seem incredibly intrusive.
Yeah. Invasive.
Very invasive of, well, I had this going on when I went through my thing. What was your experience like? Tell me more details. Be specific. Like they were very intrusive, intensive questions, but the heart behind it was just a level of care that is rarely seen, especially in the church. I think it's more often seen outside of the church than within the church, sadly, of just, no, I want you to tell me everything, and I'm going to listen to everything, and then I'm going to respond. And they did that excellently. So shout out to Jim and Alicia. A great example of what the difference is.
And I think the fear and why, and it's not like people have purposely done this. I think the fear is that if we show too much empathy, we support the issue. We're pointing people towards the issue and stuff, instead of pointing people towards Jesus.
Sure.
And while we don't ever want to necessarily kind of do that, we have to be able to relate to people. We have, like, Jesus willingly understood where people were coming from, who they were. Like, he sat with them in their experiences first and foremost. And then he pointed them to him. And so it's that's that experience that we have to be able to help people bring out. But a lot of times it's just sitting with them. When Jesus was in the garden, like, it was just, hey, come sit with me, just be with me in these moments here. And that's what we need to do a lot of times, and not feel like we have to have the answer. We have to push it out, because a lot of times you may not. There will be experiences that we might have where it's like, man, I don't know how to deal with this. When I had to minister to a family that the mom had overdosed on heroin, that wasn't, I've never had that type of experience before. And it was a lot of just sitting, asking them what they are processing, what are they dealing with, and letting them work through those emotions, and building, that trust, and pointing them towards Jesus in a unique way of building empathy with them. And so that's essentially what we have to be comfortable with, is just sitting there and not feeling like we have the answers. Because if you feel like you have to have the answers, that's you trying to be like God. That's you thinking,
Yeah.
hey, if I just have the right answers, I can fix this situation, make them feel better about themselves,
Yeah.
and then I can move on in my way.
One, is it even one of those situations where you have to say anything? Like, is there ever an appropriate time to say something in situations like that, where, like, what do you even say in those moments? Like, is it, because like we see this in the book of Job,
Yeah.
going back to that, where Eliab and the other guys that were friends with Job, when he lost his family and lost everything, when God was testing him, that they sat with him for 3 days in silence, they mourned, they cried, and they were very, very good friends up until they started talking. So it's like, that was a great example of what not to say, because they just started trying to fix everything and throwing out all the ideas. You had the know-it-all guy who's like, oh, well, you must have done something against God, this is why he's punishing you. You had the fix-it-all guy that was like, well, you must have done something at work, or yada yada yada. Like,
Right.
they had all these reasons.
There's hidden sin, or
There's hidden sin.
Yeah.
His wife was just curse God and die. Like, there's no point. Like, just give up, you know. But is there ever in those situations an appropriate time to say something? And if there is, what do we even say so we're not falling into that fix-it-all trap?
Yeah, and I think that's one of those things where, as Christians, you have to be incredibly sensitive to the Holy Spirit, and not trying to think like, are you trying to fix something?
Yeah.
It's not your responsibility to fix anyone. It's not your responsibility to fix the situation. You have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable in this situation.
Mhm.
And so the best thing you can do is just sit there, mourn with them, sit in silence, ask questions, ask some of those questions about how they are doing. What are they actually feeling? Help them kind of understand, what are they feeling in that moment? Because a lot of times we feel like, I don't really want to ask those questions. They'll let you know, like, I don't feel like answering that.
Yeah.
But that's incredibly helpful for someone,
Mhm.
you know, to ask some of those questions on what they're actually feeling, what they're actually kind of going through in those moments.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, God will reveal, like, hey, is there actually a time and a place for you to actually say something?
Mhm.
But whatever it might be, there's multiple times where people would wait quite a while
Mhm.
in the scriptures before they would actually, like, Nathan the prophet is a perfect example, where he would wait a long time before
Yeah.
he would actually say something to King David.
Mhm.
A lot of the prophets would wait a decent amount of time before they would go out
Yeah.
and say something on behalf of God. And I think too often as Christians, we're just throwing like mouth service out there, thinking that, oh, if I just say this prayer, if I
Right.
just say this
We have all of
scripture,
these cute quotes and stuff.
right?
Yeah.
Like, when we're treating it like a spell.
Yeah.
We're treating it like a spell, or something that, hey, if I just say this, if I
Mhm.
say this thing, all of a sudden it's going to fix this situation. And so we throw out Bible verses, we throw out these things, and the Bible is not meant to be used as a spell book to try and like cure a situation, to try and fix something like that
Mhm.
at all. It's always to point people towards Jesus and who he is for them in their lives.
Right.
And that's the point of all discipleship, is to point people back to, like, man, what does obedience to Jesus look like for you?
Mhm.
And so in that morning situation, that's all like your questions, all those things is like, what does it look like for you? For some people, it might be you need to rest, you need to sleep, whatever it might be, just very practical things that you see taught throughout the scriptures. But for others, it's just you being there for someone, exactly who Jesus is, and letting Jesus work through you in that, so that they don't feel alone.
Yeah. And you know, it's tough too, especially us being in ministry, and a lot of people who listen being in ministry or having been in ministry, or just leadership roles in general, whether at your job or you lead a team or something. It's so natural and so easy to fall into the fix-it-all trap, because you feel like, well, that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to, the people have come to me for help, I gotta fix it. So as far as from a leadership perspective, um how can leaders, pastors, people within their community who are kind of focal points that people go to for wisdom and advice, what's kind of their takeaway from a leadership perspective of, all right, yes, I'm called to fix things, but not fix people. God fixes people. And we're not called to be fix-it-alls, because God fixes it all. So from a leadership perspective, like, what do you think is the best practice as far as applying this, like some practical steps?
Yeah, I think we can fix processes, we can fix systems, but we have to be very comfortable with the fact of, like, man, there are the things that will not be fixed on this side of heaven.
Mhm.
And that's really hard for a lot of us to kind of wrestle with, that, like, hey, Jesus flat out said the poor will always be with us,
Yeah.
which means hunger, which means poverty. That's never going to be fixed.
Yeah.
And your responsibility is to do work, to serve in it, to serve the people in it, and just know there's going to be more and more needs for that, and not to feel wary, not to grow wary of doing good. What the scripture says in 2 Corinthians of like, hey, this is just what's going to happen. There's going to be this continuous need always. And so you have to be okay with that. You also have to be okay with just knowing that whatever the people are kind of going through, you sit with them, dwell with them, and let God try to fix that situation, like what you were saying. And I think that, I mean, it's a mindset you have to go into. If you go in, okay, I'm having a counseling session, or we're having people are having problems with their marriage.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to give a couple verses and they just need to go do those couple of verses and then they're going to be fine.
Right.
You're having a wrong situation. And then the other thing that leaders have to be really cautious of, and I've seen this a lot, and I've become very wary of leaders who do this, especially pastors who will say, man, there's just more that meets the eye to this. There's sin in the camp.
Never heard that before.
Right. Like there's just, I'm very, very aware of that now, because it's like, man, you're just assuming that
the worst in people.
Yeah. The worst in people, that, oh, because the situation hasn't been fixed, and because, assuming your words would have been essentially divinely from God and should have fixed that situation, because it's not, it must be because of sin, and you are no better than Job's friends.
And it's the worst combination, because it's the worst. It's the worst advice at someone's weakest point.
Yeah.
And it just makes a terrible combination of, like, Job eventually, great example. All of his friends eventually leave. His wife is not around during the latter chapters of that book, and he's just alone with God. Same with the story of the Good Samaritan. The person who's on the side of the road eventually is by themselves until the Good Samaritan comes by, and it's so weird how, in trying to fix everything, we actually break everything and screw everything up. And yeah, it's just crazy. So I think, just touching on that, any final thoughts before we kind of transition to what this last Sunday was like, just as far as the message and the reception? Because I mean, there's a lot of fix-it-alls in our church. So, like, what was their reaction to this message?
I think it's been kind of a mixed reaction, where we've all experienced and have been hurt by people who are fix-it-alls, where they're giving advice and it's like, I didn't really need advice in this situation. I didn't need you to try and fix the situation. I needed empathy. I didn't need sympathy. In this, you're trying to fix something, and that's not what I needed at all. They've been in situations where people assumed the worst about them. They assumed that there was sin in the camp, and there wasn't anything like that. And then because of that, I knew a pastor that, because he assumed there was sin in the camp, he told a daughter, like, hey, you need to leave your mother, who's really, really sick, because there's hidden sin. And that could have destroyed the family, and luckily she didn't. But there's just advice that is going around there that is just incredibly terrible. But at the same time, there's the same situation that happens to people. Need to be just as sympathetic towards leaders, where if you're not in leadership, or if you have been burned by that, it's also realizing that you're just as much as in temptation of being like, man, I could lead this better, right? And you start giving advice to leaders as well, without considering all the pressure that goes to a pastor putting together a sermon and trying to reach all of their audience, the lost, and the person who has gone to Bible college. And you're trying to fix this message that you didn't feel like gave enough to it, right? And you're trying to fix someone who they're in leadership and their marriage is falling apart. And you immediately assume that it's because, well, maybe they are struggling with pornography, or maybe it's because they're abusive, or because of a situation at work, right? There's unfaithfulness. And it's like, well, no, you're doing the same thing now, right? And so there needs to be incredible grace that we show towards each other in this, of just knowing, like, man, we're not called to fix anyone. We're called to sit with people, no matter how hard and how difficult it is, of seeing people who just, man, like, I pray for them. There's one guy specifically that I know that, man, I love this kid. I've had the opportunity to disciple him some, and like he just like I know he's messing around with drugs right now. I know that he's fallen back into it, and like I reach out to him all the time. And it would be very easy for me to just send out a message, the verses and all those things, and just be done with him and feel like I sent that off.
Right.
But that's not what God has called us to do. God has called you to sit and to love people continuously, just as God has done, right? Mm-hmm. God doesn't continuously beat you over the head with a message over and over again. He's right there with you, reminding you he's here, he's with you. And you need to sit there with them as well. Whoever that is, the person, sit with them and let God fix them.
Yeah, that's powerful stuff. And man, I mean, we have horror stories. Just there's so many come to mind. We can't really get into them right now because it would be too much for the podcast. But I mean, just one off the top of my head, there's another church long time ago where there's a couple and the husband was committing adultery, but they didn't know that at the time. They were trying to have a kid and they couldn't have a kid, and they had a miscarriage, 2 miscarriages. And the pastor's advice is, because your husband is having adultery, that's why you had 2 miscarriages. And it's just like the most like, what? Like, this doesn't even like, and stories like that happen all the time. So, take to heart. This is a tough one to navigate, to figure out if you are the fix-it-all type. I know I struggle with this a lot. A lot of people in leadership struggle with this, and it definitely is a process. And speaking of fix-it-alls, we had a lot of fixing these last 2 weeks. We were moving. We were trying to solve all of these problems, do our jobs, do the church, do everything like that. But we actually finally did move. This is Andrew's new house. How do you like it?
It's great. Now most of the boxes are undone. So yeah, it was an exhausting last couple of weeks. So, if you guys haven't heard from us, if we've been delayed in getting in messages and all that stuff, apologize. I don't know. I don't have the energy that I did before. And it was so much more exhausting moving.
Yeah.
Multiple people.
Yeah.
And everything.
Yeah. Essentially Wednesday through Wednesday, we're like 2 or 3 moves back to back to back.
Yeah.
Like there's your move, there's my move. And then I help my brother move. It's just like, geez, I need a nap.
Yeah. There's Ben's move. Like, yeah, there's just, a lot of it. Mm-hmm. So,
and I think, trying to tie it in with that, since that's one of our real world examples, and, we'll end with this before going into, what we're doing next Sunday and for the events coming up at Reunion Coffee House. How do we avoid that fix-it-all mentality in situations that are so easy of like, well, we got to move, we got to get everything set up, we got to fix it all. Like, how do you, maintain the balance of family, church, work, move, all of this without falling into that fix-it-all trap?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty tough, just because my personality is very much like go, 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 and stay up till 2-3 in the morning and then get up early and knock it out all again, right?
Yeah.
And especially without having your normal rhythms, when your rhythms are taken out from underneath you, like that's brutal for me, to be able to have those out. So.
And what do you mean by rhythms?
Well,
there's people who don't know.
There's daily rhythms of having like, I normally have my daily rhythms of my quiet time, book reading, journaling. I've got my morning cardio and podcast listening, workouts. So I've got my normal rhythms that I kind of have,
right,
that I do. And so when you move, all that's kind of messed up as you're trying to figure out the new ones of, oh wait, I don't know, where did I pack my Bible, or where, like, I can't really journal right now. And we're trying to figure out, like, I got lost on a walk. I don't know where I'm at, things like that. So, so figuring out those rhythms is huge, of like just trying to get into one of those. I think is like one of the first things in there, but it's also kind of putting out an outline of like, okay, what are all the things that are coming up for when you have multiple things on your plate?
Yeah.
And just kind of knowing, okay, hey, these are all the things, and letting people know that are around you of like, this is going to be a pretty stressful time for me.
Yeah.
So like right now, like, the move was pretty stressful, but we also have some more stressful things coming up of, all right, so for work, it's end of the quarter.
Yeah. Great timing.
Halfway through the year.
Yeah.
We're also trying to get our 501c3 done. The church.
Yeah.
We are, we're trying to get a budget out to some people that want to support the church financially. So we're trying to wrap that up.
Yeah.
We're
Expand
looking,
our team.
yeah, we're looking to get support through other networks. So there's a lot of things that are all in kind of like crunch time. Also, while we're trying to ramp up for a new study that we're going to do in the community, now that we're in the community, that we're trying to start in about a month. And so a lot of it is just being very transparent with other people, like, hey, there's a lot of stress coming on. If you can let me know, real communication on like where you're at with the stuff, texting, following up, and just letting people know, like, there's a lot of anxiety for me in this. Just let me know where you're at with it.
And to tie it back to Jim, setting a good expectation so you don't have an expectation gap.
Yeah, knowing that, like, you know what, some of this stuff probably won't get done. I'll probably fall behind. Letting some people know, like, hey, you know, like,
being realistic with it.
I let some of our network guys know, like, hey, you know what, I know I said I'd get this done. Probably not going to have this done by this time frame. You know, looking at it by week, like, hey, during this week I can probably knock this project out. By this week I can knock this one out. And these are just, I mean, this isn't spiritual advice. This isn't things of like, hey, you need to do this scripturally, but like just practical things that you can kind of do, of laying it out. A full week agenda, where do they overlap? I know I can fit in about 3 major projects in a week. Any more than that, it'll be too overwhelming for me. For some people it might be 2, for some people it might be 1, just in your type personality and what you have. But you just know that laid out by a week. If you have those out, you just let people know where they're at. You let people know what causes anxiety. For me, it's when people don't communicate and let me know where they're at on a project. Where I feel like, hey, where are we at with this? And so I just let people know on my team or wherever they're at, like, hey, this causes a lot of anxiety for me. I need to know where we at with this. Like, just communicate, message me and stuff. So
yeah, absolutely. And it's weird how, you know, the fix it all in a way can be resolved by just overly communicating, being aware of your vulnerabilities, being aware of other people, having that emotional intelligence to connect with people. And like, hey, this is just not going to work this week. You know, let's be realistic. So just a sneak peek, Andrew, real quick, your elevator pitch. What are we talking about next Sunday?
Yeah, so next Sunday, we've covered the you know, you want to be everywhere all, you want to fix everything at all, and now it's going to be the know-it-alls, that you feel like you have to know everything. Gosh, Todd. You feel like you have to know everything to be in control. And so what knowledge does, and you know, honestly, the issue of knowledge and how we hide behind zeal a lot, of like, man, I just, you know, I love this person's zeal, or they have so much zeal, and actually the damage that zeal actually causes for a lot of people. We can all think about someone, especially early on in our life, Jackie Hill Perry, amazing author, amazing person in general. If you guys don't know who she is, but follow her on Instagram. But she posted a little while ago of, like, you know, her first zealous moments as a Christian and the things she would post. And she was like, man, I was so arrogant in what I was posting. And there's some people like, oh no, that was so brave in what they were posting. And it's like, it wasn't really brave because it wasn't reaching anyone. It wasn't very tactful. It wasn't very empathetic, you know. And I think we all can think about, like, when we first believed, or when we first discovered some new theology, like, you know, when I first like discovered Calvinism and Reformed theology, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing in the world. I need to tell everyone, right? And even people who didn't really care or ask, it can push people away because of how zealous you are.
And speaking of zealous, Calvin even has that quote of doctrine of, you know, zeal without doctrine is like useless or just nonsense. Poisonous.
And Edwards says something similar too. And that was actually what was told me when I was 18, pursuing after a youth pastor. And another guy, my mentor's mentor, was talking to me when we were driving, and he was like, you know what, I think you're supposed to be a church planter. And I was like, no, I'm only supposed to be a youth pastor. And I was very adamant about it, about my zeal for the teens, and how I didn't want to minister to old people because old people are arrogant and don't want to do all this stuff.
You knew it all at 18.
And he quoted that to me, and I was incredibly offended by it. But like, looking back, like, oh no, like, your zeal can cause a lot of damage. You will preach your harshest sermons when you're young. People flat out of, like, straight out of Bible college, who are brand new church planters, who are brand new to a church, they will preach their hardest messages right out of the gate from that, because of that. So there's a lot of things that, you know, we'll explore into, like, knowledge and what knowledge is for, and, you know, how to balance that out.
Well, it's gonna be a good one. We hope to see you guys there this Sunday, 5:30 to 7. And with that, we're gonna hit the gym, and we'll catch you later. See you next week.
See ya.